You're leaving your family in the lurch, Rebecca." The sound of my mother's voice boomed from my phone, shattering the quiet of my workspace. I squeezed the top of my nose, feeling the stress setting in before I even had a chance to react. "Mom, I've gone over this probably a million times by now. I simply can't continue to get Brian out of trouble. He's 3 decades old, for crying out loud. He needs to be accountable for his own life and choices." Her answer came instantly, delivered harshly, and packed with the same accusatory tone designed to make me feel guilty that I'd heard so many times. "After all, he's your brother. Family members are expected to support one another." I took a quick look at the organized files on my desk, each stack a symbol of the extensive time I put in to remain financially secure. "I have helped him, Mom. For a very long time. This has nothing to do with our family. This is all about the simple fact that he just doesn't give a damn. He went through all the money he had, and now he wants me to fix the situation. Like always, I'm Rebecca, and since the earliest moments I can remember, I've been the family's go-to responsible person. Following my father's death when I was only 10, I matured rapidly, taking on more burdens than many kids ever have to shoulder. At the same time, my brother Brian always had a special talent for avoiding any real responsibility. And here he is at 30 years old, working a part-time gig at a shop and somehow managing to spend all of his money on pricey electronics, going out at night, and holidays that were totally beyond his means. When his landlord threatened to kick him out, my mom didn't ask me for help. She told me to pay his rent. I said no. That single decision caused my mom and Brian to spiral out of control. 2 days after that, I woke up to a message popping up on my phone. Reading that lengthy update from my mother on Facebook really made my stomach drop. You'd think family would support each other, right? But unfortunately, that's not how everyone sees it. There are folks who would rather cut ties with their own relatives than offer any kind of support. It's a real tragedy when material desires become more important than family bonds. I'm just so let down. A flood of responses started appearing. People I hadn't connected with in ages jumped into the conversation, expressing sympathy, but also judging me for being self-centered or unfeeling. And then there was what Brian had to say. "I never imagined my own sister would abandon me like this, but I suppose she values money more than her own family. I'm glad to at least know who I can actually count on. Thank you, Mom." The things they wrote hurt, though not as much as the feeling of being double-crossed. They were making me out to be the bad guy to everyone we know, distorting the truth to portray me as unfeeling. I set my phone aside and gazed out the window, feeling resentment growing inside. Was this how they thanked me, after everything I'd given up for them over the years? Was this their way of publicly humiliating me for establishing limits? But as the anger hardened into something more focused, I came to a conclusion. If they wanted to turn this into a public drama, then I was prepared to defend myself. It was impossible for me to get rid of the anger I had after seeing those Facebook posts. I did my best to always be the reliable one, to handle things for the family when my dad passed away. However, this was going too far. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop opened in front of me, and thought back over the last several years. I honestly couldn't tell you how often I jumped in to assist Brian. It's been more times than I can actually recall. I paid his expenses until he managed to find another job when he was fired from his previous one 2 years back for simply not showing up. I fronted the cash to get his car repaired when it gave out on him, only to discover later that he'd spent it on tickets to a show. And the funds he borrowed so he could get back on his feet, they were immediately spent on expensive shoes and stuff he bought online. The thing that bothered me most wasn't even Brian acting so irresponsibly. What really bothered me was my mom always taking his side without fail. She'd always say, "Guys are wired differently," anytime I brought it up. "He just needs some time to sort things out." That time had stretched into years of nothing but justifications, and now, because of those posts she made, she'd gone from trying to excuse his behavior to flat-out attacking me. I accessed my email, wanting to reply to a question about work, but I just couldn't concentrate. The stress I felt in my gut wouldn't let me continue with anything else. I'd had it. I contacted an attorney later that night. With obvious frustration, I went into detail about the situation. My voice trembled as I talked about the posts and how they'd hurt my name. "I can't just stand by while they do this," I stated, barely keeping my rage under control. The lawyer listened without interrupting before giving their response. Defamation lawsuits can be complicated, but if these postings have truly damaged your life, be it professionally or emotionally, you likely have a reason to take action. To begin, we should collect some proof. After ending the call, I felt both furious and relieved. Someone was finally supporting me, but while I was saving images of the posts, I had a sudden thought. My father had left both Brian and me an inheritance that was meant to be secure until we reached the age of 25. It had been a long time since I considered it, just assuming that my share was safely stored away in some kind of account. I just couldn't resist my own inquisitiveness. I phoned the lawyer again the following day. Along with everything else, could you also check on my inheritance? I just want to confirm that everything is all right. Certainly, the lawyer answered. Little did I know that request was about to reveal a much larger act of treachery than just a few posts on Facebook. A week had passed since I contacted the lawyer, and I received an email that made me feel cold all over. The subject line was, "Results from Inheritance Inquiry." After I clicked on it, I read the summary closely. My lawyer had uncovered the fact that Brian had been taking out funds from what should have been my part of the inheritance for the last 5 years. The account had been overseen by my mother up until I turned 25, but apparently Brian had somehow managed to get into it afterwards and had been taking money out consistently. I was shaking as I went through the document. A lot of money simply vanished. Funds I didn't even realize were mine, spent on goodness knows what. When I contacted my attorney for a deeper understanding, his tone was measured, yet resolute. It seems that your brother gained entry to the account illegitimately. This is undeniably a theft case. A considerable amount of what should have been yours has been taken by him. I reclined in my seat, attempting to digest his words. How could this have occurred? For many years, my mother oversaw the account. She never alluded to Brian possessing access. She may not have been aware, the lawyer commented, but it's also conceivable that she believed he'd handle it in a dependable way. Regardless, this is a grave violation. The repercussions were mind-boggling. It wasn't just that Brian had been stealing from me, but my mother, whether she was aware or not, had enabled it. That evening, I was planted at my kitchen table, fixated on the monetary documents my lawyer had provided. Each purchase felt like a painful strike. Shows, gadgets, getaways, items I had labored to purchase for myself while Brian had been using my assets to support his way of life. All of a sudden, the Facebook thing felt insignificant. This was much more than simple embarrassment. This was a profound act of disloyalty that cut to the heart of my own family. I considered calling my mother at that very moment, demanding an explanation. However, I checked myself. If I were to challenge her without a proper strategy, it would only result in further evasion and manipulation. Instead, I sent my attorney an email. So what do I do now? I wondered to myself. I had reached a firm decision before sleep finally took me. This was not something I would simply ignore. For so long, I'd been the one giving in, trying to avoid conflict while Brian seemed to do whatever he wanted. But that was about to change. A single idea persisted in my thoughts as I switched off the lamp. They're about to realize just how serious I am. The following day, I sat down with my attorney in his office to talk about what to do next. I felt claustrophobic in the tiny space as I explained all the details he had discovered. I stated definitively, this goes beyond just the money I was supposed to inherit. Brian and my mother have gone too far. Those posts on social media were already unacceptable. Now, on top of everything, I learned that he's been ripping me off for years. I want to do something about it, something significant. My lawyer simply nodded, his face remaining composed and businesslike. The first thing we'll do is file a lawsuit for libel, based on what was said online. But as for him stealing my inheritance, that will require a different lawsuit. It should be relatively simple, considering the documentation we have, but things could still get complicated. Complicated is fine with me, I responded, folding my arms. I'm through with letting them take advantage of me. Later that night, I phoned my mother. I needed to know the truth, whether she was involved in this or if she was just blindly trusting Brian. Hey Mom, I began, managing to keep my voice even. Rebecca, she replied immediately, her voice carrying the same familiar irritation. You trying to say sorry by calling me now? You know how Brian can be. Just stop, I blurted out, stopping her from finishing her thought. I need to ask you something about Dad's will, particularly concerning why Brian has been getting into the money that's supposed to be mine. She waited a while before responding. What exactly are you talking about? She questioned, her tone sounding puzzled, or maybe it was because she felt bad about something. I told her that I had someone-in-law look into everything. For half a decade now, Brian's been taking money from my inheritance. It's thousands of dollars, Mom. Were you aware of this going on? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca, it's not like you're imagining it, she answered at last. Brian was in need of some assistance. He gave me his word that he'd give it all back. My heart felt like it was constricting, a feeling of rage and shock taking over me. You were aware? You knew that he was essentially stealing from me and kept it a secret? I don't consider it theft, she said, trying to defend her actions. We're family and it's our money. He was having a hard time and I had faith he'd do the right thing with it. I chuckled with a hint of anger and sadness. Do the right thing? He's been spending it all on trips and new toys while I've been working myself to exhaustion, and you let this happen. Rebecca, please listen to me, she begged. You just don't get it. Brian's had a rough go of it lately. I assumed you'd be fine without the money. That's not something for you to decide, I replied sharply. I was relying on you to keep that money safe, and you gave it to him like it was nothing important. Do you even comprehend the depth of my feelings of betrayal at this moment? She began to argue, but I just couldn't hear it anymore. I told them in an icy tone that the discussion was finished. A feeling of complete understanding came over me as I disconnected the call. I'd allowed them to control me and make me feel bad enough to give in for so many years. I won't let it happen any longer. It wasn't simply a matter of getting back what belonged to me, it was finally about asserting myself. The repercussions of that phone conversation hit me hard and fast. The following morning, I saw a barrage of unanswered calls and panicked messages from my mother. In the voicemails, her manner seemed to bounce between defending them and pure desperation. She pleaded, "You can't do this, Rebecca. Brian didn't intend to cause any damage." This was then followed by, "Let's try to talk this out together as a family." She begged me not to get legal representation involved. I didn't reply, though. I found a feeling of self-governance. Of course, Brian chose an alternative method. Later that day, after logging into Facebook, I discovered another set of posts aimed directly at me. First, she's unwilling to offer assistance to her own brother. Now she's making threats to sue her own family over finances. He went on, saying I was avaricious, egotistical, and uncaring. It's amazing how some folks' real personalities come out when money is involved. I just looked at the post, and my mouth grew tighter and tighter. The comment area was inundated with that group of supporters I remembered, all offering their unwanted judgments. I snapped a picture of the screen and immediately forwarded it to my attorney. The following day, I sat down with him once more. He told me that we would be moving forward with both lawsuits. He explained that the libel case should be relatively simple. When it comes to the inheritance, he continued, we possess ample proof to demonstrate misappropriation. However, you have to brace yourself. He warned that it would put an even bigger wedge between my mother and me. I sat up straighter, my face becoming stern. The relationship is fractured beyond saving already, I stated. Let's move ahead, I declared. He gave me a nod. There's one additional issue. He pointed out that if this goes to trial, Brian will be forced to explain where the funds vanished to. Do you feel prepared for that? He asked. It might turn nasty. I found myself faltering for a brief moment. Did I truly want to discover the full scope of this deception? But then, the years of sacrifice for ungrateful family members flooded my mind. I stated resolutely that I was prepared. That night, my mom called me again. This time, I answered the phone. Rebecca, she started with a shaky voice. I spoke with Brian, she said. He shared some details regarding the finances. I wasn't aware it was this serious. What specifics did he reveal? I inquired, my voice tinged with hostility. Her lack of response communicated everything. I apologize, she mumbled finally. I didn't comprehend how much he had taken. I should have intervened, she added. While her words sounded insincere, I allowed her to proceed. I intend to speak with him again. We'll sort through this, she pleaded. Just please don't pursue legal action. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. It's not up to me any longer, Mom, I responded. You should have considered this long before now. As I ended the call, a blend of fury and release washed over me. The reality of the situation was becoming clear to her, though it was much too late to reverse the consequences. About 7 days later, I received an unexpected phone call from my attorney, who had news that really took me by surprise. "We've continued to examine the financial documents," he started, his voice even but suggesting gravity. "And apparently, Brian didn't just help himself to your inheritance. He's been wrongly using funds from your mother's accounts as well." I was stunned. "What exactly are you saying?" He went on to explain. "It looks like he's been taking money out of a fund your mother had specifically put aside for her retirement. We discovered regular transactions that follow a similar pattern as the withdrawals he made from your inheritance." For a second, I was speechless. My mother had been so firm in her defense of Brian, totally overlooking his flaws, and now it turned out he'd stolen from her too. "Does she know about this?" I managed to ask at last. "Not at this time," was his response. "However, if we move forward with both legal actions, this information will inevitably surface." I ended the call, my head spinning with thoughts. Though I was furious with my mother for enabling Brian's behavior, the prospect of her losing her retirement money filled me with dread. I gave her a call later that night. "Mom," I started, doing my best to keep my voice calm. "There's something I need to tell you, and it won't be easy to take in." Her tone was tired as she responded, "What is it?" I told her everything that the lawyer had discovered. The silence from her side of the line was absolutely overwhelming. He took my money?" she finally murmured, her voice trembling. "Yes, Mom," I replied, making my tone gentler. "I was hesitant to bring this up, but you have a right to be informed. Brian has been taking things that belong to both of us." Her reaction was a combination of disbelief and intense sadness. "I can't accept this," she managed to say, her voice cracking with emotion. "I placed all my faith in him. I gave him my complete confidence." I replied quietly that she really shouldn't have. "I understand your affection for him, but you've been supporting his bad behavior for a long time. This is the inevitable result of failing to hold someone responsible." She started weeping, and a sudden feeling of compassion stirred within me for her. Regardless of the pain she inflicted on me, she was also someone harmed by Brian's self-centered behavior. "What are our next steps?" She managed to get out through her sobs. "We're going to allow the legal system to do its job," I stated definitively. "The money is secondary. Now it's about making sure someone takes responsibility." The next few days were fraught with tension. My attorney submitted the paperwork for each of our cases, and the impending showdown felt like a heavy burden pressing down on me. For a long time, I'd permitted my mom and Brian to exploit my generous nature, but on this occasion, I was holding firm. It was time for them to be held responsible for their behavior, regardless of the pain it caused. Part of me was yearning to see Brian brought to account for his actions, for all those years of feeling like he deserved special treatment, for the money he stole, and for how he tried to make me look like the bad guy. Yet, I also realized that going through with this would be a really tough ordeal, airing all our family's dirty laundry for everyone to see. The moment Brian walked into the courtroom with my mom, his self-satisfied look made me incredibly angry. He even had the nerve to seem uninterested, as if this whole thing was just an annoyance to him, but my mom seemed utterly crushed. She wouldn't look at me, and her shoulders were slumped as if she was finally collapsing under all the pressure. The lawyer presented the facts of the case in a careful, organized manner. The paper trail was all there: financial documents, account information, and copies of social media posts. Every time my lawyer made a point, I watched Brian squirm in his chair. When Brian finally had his turn to speak, he predictably started trying to pass the blame. "I didn't intend for things to escalate to this point," is what he claimed, and his voice was full of fake regret. "I was having a hard time, he said, continuing with his story. "I only used the funds because I was confident I could replace them." Then he added that "I just don't get what it feels like to be desperate, because I've always had everything under control." Hearing his justifications made me grit my teeth. Being in a tough spot didn't justify the trips he took, the stuff he bought, or the nights he spent partying. No matter how hard he tried to act like he was the one being wronged, the truth was clear based on what the evidence showed. When the judge called on my mom to give her testimony, she paused for a moment, casting an anxious look at Brian. Eventually, she started to speak and her voice was shaky. I had faith in Brian, she confessed. I was under the impression he would handle the funds in a responsible manner, though I wasn't aware of the exact amount he had taken or the purpose for which he was using it. I I wasn't conscious of the extent to which he had wounded Rebecca. Her statement had a painful effect, though it also had a touch of responsibility woven into it. She was accepting what was true. The decision of the court went my way. Brian received the order to give back the money he had taken illegally, and the slander case reached a resolution by requiring both him and my mom to issue an apology that everyone could see online. It wasn't exactly the perfect ending. I was aware it would require many years before Brian could reimburse everything he owed, and even though the apology felt good, it didn't fully undo the harm they'd caused. Nevertheless, it was a beginning. As we made our way out of the courtroom, Brian gave me an angry look. "I hope you're pleased with yourself," he said harshly. "I am," was my straightforward response, and I looked right back at him without wavering. My mom stayed behind, her eyes shining with tears. "Rebecca, I have no idea how to fix what's happened," she said in a low voice. "The first thing you can do is start being truthful," I answered. "To yourself, to me, and to Brian too. No more avoiding the truth." She gave a slow nod, and you could see both guilt and sorrow in her expression. "I'll give it my best shot," she murmured. That night I sat in my place, thinking deeply about everything that had gone on. The legal fight in court was finished, but the real healing process was just getting going. Establishing clear limits with my family was definitely going to be a challenge, but I believed I possessed the inner resources to accomplish it. Seeing my mother and brother for their true selves caused me pain, yet I also experienced a feeling of freedom knowing I had finally defended my own needs. The weeks that followed the judge's decision were strangely calm. I wasn't swamped with phone calls or messages from my mom anymore, urgently telling me that I needed to be there for Brian or find a solution to their latest emergency. It was almost as if the judgment had compelled her to create some distance, or perhaps she was simply too ashamed to look me in the eye. However, the quiet didn't feel devoid of something. It felt like tranquility. One afternoon, while I was organizing my financial statements at the kitchen table, my phone started ringing. The display showed my mother's name. For a split second, I debated allowing it to go to voicemail, but something encouraged me to answer it. "Hey Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello, Rebecca," she responded, sounding uncertain. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about all that has happened." About what was left to me, the legal battle, Brian, I just waited, not knowing where this was headed. "Initially, I didn't want to accept it," she went on. "But the reality of the situation is now impossible to deny. You were correct about him and about myself. I allowed him to use you, and I did nothing while he was hurting you." "I am so sorry," she said. I was more impacted by these words than I would have thought. I had imagined hearing these words for a long time, but now that it was actually happening, I was unsure how to react. I finally spoke, and I said thank you for those words. "Though, Mom, it's not merely about offering an apology, it's about transforming myself. For such a long time, I allowed both you and Brian to behave as if I were insignificant, and I can't let that continue anymore." She gave a sigh. "I realize that, and I've been contemplating ways in which I can improve. All I can hope is that I haven't waited too long to repair our relationship." I didn't immediately give an answer. I eventually responded, saying that it wasn't beyond repair, although it is going to require patience. In the meantime, Brian had completely stopped communicating. I had a nagging suspicion that he might be devising some kind of retaliation, but my attorney had guaranteed me that the binding legal documents would prevent him from being able to lash out at me financially. Nevertheless, I knew better than to have faith in him. One day, I got an alert showing that Brian had put something up on Facebook. Despite knowing it might not be a good idea, I clicked on it, preparing myself for another wave of hateful words. However, what I saw was a post that didn't sound like him at all. "I would like to express my apologies to all the people I've caused pain, particularly my sibling, Rebecca. I committed errors that I'm not able to undo, and I'm trying to make amends for everything. I understand that it will take a while, but I'm hoping that one day she will be able to pardon me." I was unsure whether to laugh or to cry. Could it be possible that he was truly trying to own up to what he'd done, or was this just another act for show? Regardless of what it was, I opted not to acknowledge it. I wasn't prepared to revisit that past just yet. Not at this moment. In the months that followed after, I turned my attention to piecing my life back together. I immersed myself in my professional life, I devoted time to activities I'd let fall by the wayside, and I even started arranging for a vacation I had put off for far too long. The connection I shared with my mom was still delicate, though it was working. She'd try to phone me every week. Her aim wasn't to gripe or ask for stuff, but just to see how I was. It might have been a minor thing, but it had a big impact on me. I chose to keep Brian at arm's length. Even though he was legally bound to give back the money he'd taken from me, I figured it would take ages for me to actually get most of it. And honestly, that was perfectly okay. I wasn't expecting any big changes in him anytime soon. What I really cared about was that I had finally gotten my independence back. A few months later, I remember being on my balcony with a cup of tea in hand, just watching the city lights glow in the distance. It felt like the first time in ages that I wasn't preoccupied with my family and everything they wanted from me. Things had shifted in ways I couldn't have even imagined. The constant stress that I carried around with me had vanished, and I was left with a sense of calm I didn't know I could even feel. I always thought sticking up for myself would mean losing all the important things, like my family and that feeling of being part of something. What actually happened was that it handed me something I'd been after for a long time: serenity. Though it was taking time, my mom and I were starting to build things up again between us. She'd still ring me once a week, usually to tell me little things, like how her garden was doing or about the book she was reading. It was like all the hidden expectations had gone, and these talks were lighter and more relaxed. Brian, well, he kept his distance. Although I was thankful for the court-mandated payments which arrived irregularly, I didn't rely on them. The reality was that to truly move on, neither his apology nor his money was necessary. Not out of resentment or bitterness, but because I valued myself, I had figured out how to be self-sufficient. That was all I needed. Considering all that had transpired, I came to the conclusion that I was the one who had changed the most, even more than my family. I'd spent years trying to get validation from individuals who appeared to consistently undervalue me. To take care of my family, I had gone above and beyond, putting my own joy and security on the back burner. But defending myself, even when it was tough, had revealed to me a different route. My mom's hesitant attempts to repair our connection offered a bit of solace. In her own way, she was trying to make things right. I couldn't entirely place my trust in her just yet, but I could occasionally see a glimpse of the mother I had always hoped for, someone who cherished me for who I was instead of just what I could do. On the other hand, Brian's situation was completely different. His public attempts to say sorry seemed insincere, and I wasn't prepared to welcome him back into my world. Perhaps someday I'll be able to pardon him, but that time is not now. The most important thing was that I had discovered how to establish limits and appreciate my personal time and energy. There were times when I had misgivings, and it wasn't a simple process. However, I now understood that defending my value was invariably the appropriate thing to do. Taking a sip of my tea, I experienced a muted satisfaction. My family perhaps didn't undergo a total transformation, but I certainly had. For me, that was sufficient. The serenity I had discovered took considerable effort to achieve, and I had no intention of relinquishing it.